should we be having um, off hours kind of away from work mandatory activities um, that if employees know that they're required to attend these activities. And yeah, I think generally that's something to be avoided as much as possible. At least if you're creating the idea that it's mandatory. It's if it's voluntary, that's a whole nother thing. And especially if it's made clear to people that there will be no negative repercussions if you don't attend. Like I'll give you an example of one that I think is healthy. A lot of organizations will have like an after hours hackathon, or like a brainstorming type thing. And usually what the employer will do is they'll have pizza and beer. It'll be fun, and it's totally voluntary, and the people that are engaged and have the time to do it, they're going to be there and they're going to really enjoy it. The people that maybe they have kids and they need to go home and be with their kids for dinner or whatever, um, they won't be there. Or if it's something that only happens once a quarter or once every 6 months, it's no big deal. But yeah, I think if you're having after hours activities that are mandatory, especially if it's happening with any type of regularity, I mean, more than once a year, that is going to create the perception in the mind of team members that the employer doesn't really care about them. That we're willing to infringe on their personal time. So that my personal view is that's something that should be avoided if possible. And again, it doesn't mean that you can't have after hours activities, but if you're going to have them, make sure that they're not mandatory and make sure that there is no negative repercussion, because sometimes those negative repercussions can be kind of how would you say it, like kind of unspoken, where it's like, no one's punishing you, but hey, guess who didn't get promoted? It's the person who never comes to these after hours activities. Then it's implied that, well, they're not saying it's mandatory, but it seems like it is, because the only people who get promoted are the ones that go to these things. So I mean, and just to put this in perspective, this is not probably the common view among operators of companies. I think many operators of companies don't view it that way. They kind of view it as like, hey, you're an employee, especially if you're on salary. Some weeks you work 40 hours a week, some weeks you work 60. And I agree with that. I mean, there are going to be times when there's a big important project that we want to hit, and that requires everyone working 50 or 60 hours a week for a couple of weeks. That's fine. What I'm suggesting here is that we just don't want that to be the norm. We don't want, as the norm, we want people to feel like, hey, we want you to have a healthy work-life balance, right? We want you to work no more than 40 hours a week. And as a rule, again, there might be some short-term things here or there where people are asked to work longer hours and they get their overtime. But as a general rule, in my view, and some of the healthiest workplace cultures that I've seen, we want to communicate with not only with our words, but with our actions, that we care about people as humans and we don't see them just as commodities that are delivering value for the organization. We truly care about them as humans. And one of the simplest ways to communicate that with our words and with our actions is to tell people, when you're not at work, I would like you to be able to relax and enjoy your time away from work. I mean, just to give you one real world example, extremely successful US based company called SAS. It's based in Cary, North Carolina. And I think they now have 15,000 plus global employees. They're privately held, but I mean, they've had record revenues every year for decades, at least up until the last time I checked on them. I don't know if they've had record revenues every year since, but just extremely successful company. And they're also known as being one of the best places in the world to work. And, it is just well known throughout the whole company that not only are you not expected to work more than 40 hours a week, but the leaders actually see that as a negative. They see it as, man, if you can't think strategically enough and organize your time well enough and delegate things and be efficient enough to not hit your goals without exceeding 40 hours a week, then we need to coach you. We need to help you to be more efficient, to plan better, to think strategically, so that you can hit your goals without having to work more than 40 hours a week. Why? Because if people do that consistently, they burn out and they eventually leave. So that's what we're trying to avoid from a totally pragmatic standpoint, is you want to have team members who are productive consistently, and sustainably. And you can't do that when people aren't unplugging, when they're consistently being pulled outside of work hours to do things that are work related. You eventually, people will burn out and they will leave, and that will cost the organization way more in the long run than what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is you coach people to think more strategically, be more efficient, but manage their time better so that they can hit their goals or exceed their goals in less than 40 hours a week. And now you've got a sustainable high performance culture, and you've got low turnover, which saves you a ton of headache and money.